Hello, buddy. You're on the Somar channel. Enjoy watching.
Tell me about a time when you weren't just lucky, but you were saved by a miracle. I was going to go to the local grocery store for dinner, but a friend told me about a meteor shower coming up. So we grabbed some sacks and went to the mountains to watch the meteors. There ended up being a mass shooting at that deli that killed 6 people. It happened just as I was supposed to be there, thanks to Tom and thanks to Camilla Pardelis. A friend from school offered to pick me up and take me to a party with him. I was in the middle of a WoW raid and refused. A little later, I found out that he had driven drunk and hit a tree and died. My husband accidentally took my diabetes pills. He thought it was the painkiller Motrin. He started having severe abdominal pain. Not realizing what he was talking about, I took Motrin. I abruptly took him to the hospital. On the way, I realized it was my medication. It turned out that he had acute pancreatitis and had actually saved his organs and possibly his life by accidentally taking medication for high blood sugar. 11th September. At the time, I lived in Carroll Gardens, a little south of the Brooklyn Bridge, and got to work by bicycle. I usually woke up around 8 a.m., packed my stuff, rode down Smith Street and crossed the Brooklyn Bridge. There, I would buy a few dozen Krispy Kreme donuts for my team at the World Trade Center and then ride to Wall Street where I worked. That Tuesday, I slept through my alarm clock and had to take the Underground. I should have been at the WTC just as it first hit, but instead ended up on the Underground. I was coming up from the Wall Street Underground station just as the second plane flew into the building. I saw a small part of the fireball and heard loud screams. I was in a coma. There was no sign that I would come out of it. The doctors talked to my wife and suggested I be released. She said no. Thanks to her. Edit. Attached is a video my wife made of my first year of recovery. Starts about a week after I came out of the coma. I had just had a catastrophic stroke. The gas cooker in our kitchen was out of order. There was a gas leak all night. And the detector didn't go off. The next morning I woke up, went downstairs and smelled it. The gas was so thick you could taste it. I quickly opened all the doors and windows and left the house. We waited about an hour and then went back inside the house. It was windy outside, so everything weathered quickly. After that, I looked everything over, replaced the cooker and went on with the day. Evening came and I went to take a shower, but there was no hot water. It turned out that for some unknown reason, the burner in the hot water tank had gone out and probably hadn't been lit all night. If it hadn't gone out, my house would have gone up in flames and I wouldn't be writing this comment right now. When I moved to New Orleans in 2004, I had 2 different housing choices, options A and B. I ended up choosing B because that flat was a bit bigger. I lived there for about 5 weeks, realized it had terrible neighbors, and no one at the housing authority wanted to do anything about it, and went back to the options to see if flat A was still available. It was already occupied, but another flat came up in the building next door. I ended up moving again to flat B. Eventually, during Katrina, flat B flooded. Flat A's roof blew off. Flat C, where I lived for a year, was fine. I can't overstate how much more complicated my life would have been if something had happened to the flat I was living in. Even disregarding my belongings, it was nearly impossible to find a place to live for several years after Katrina. It's not an exaggeration to say that if my flat had been affected, my entire life path would likely have changed drastically. We had just finished our usual meeting, of which I was the organizer, when one of my mates said, "Hey, you don't look good." I replied that I wasn't feeling well and was going to go home. He said, "No, I'll take you to the doctor." We went to the military hospital, and after a very brief examination, the doctor turned to my friend and said, "Take him to the intensive care unit and tell them he has appendicitis." Less than an hour later, I was lying in the operating theatre. The funny thing is, I had just returned from a diving weekend where I had spent 2 days diving off a boat in the Red Sea for 4 hours. Several times I dived to depths below 30 meters. If my appendix had decided to give up a day earlier, I probably would have died. Traveling around Australia, I stayed with a dude for a week or 2. At first, he seemed like a really cool guy, but then I quickly realized that he was a complete alcoholic and a bargainer who had recently done time in prison. One night, when I wasn't home, he got really drunk and caused a commotion in the apartment block. The tenants called the police. I arrived and saw police cars everywhere. I was wildly annoyed and took a plane ticket to go see another city the next morning. When I woke up in the morning, I quickly threw my clothes in my bag and was about to leave without even saying goodbye. But I thought that was kind of rude, so I grabbed a pen and started writing a little note thanking the dude for letting me stay. While I was writing the note, he woke up and walked into the lounge. I'm like, "Oh man, sorry, I didn't mean to wake you up, but I found a cheap plane ticket leaving right now." He's like, "Can I just quickly grab something out of your bag before you go?" I left something in there. Fucking hell, it turns out that the night before, when the police were coming, this dude had pulled out his stash and stuck it in my bag. And I just didn't notice it in my haste to leave. I was literally about to get on the plane with that bag. I imagine I would have sat there like an idiot, trying to justify myself with the classic excuse, "It's not mine." If I hadn't decided to write that goodbye note, I would have been imprisoned in a foreign country. It happened in high school. I was hanging out with my mates when suddenly some dudes I knew drove up. Knowing that we played tennis, they offered to buy us some cool rackets for cheap. We got curious and went outside to see what they had. The rackets were really top-notch and so new that they still had the anti-theft tags hanging on them. We didn't buy them. Turns out these dudes had robbed a sporting goods shop and shot a couple of clerks. We had a New Zealand cruise booked in December 2019. I was so excited about it. We were going to take a day trip to the volcano. However, our car had a serious engine problem and we decided to postpone the trip because we wouldn't have enough money to both fix the car and the trip. Anyway, I'm sitting at work, sad that I'm not on holiday, and then the reports start coming in. What happened was this. On the 9th of December 2019, there was an explosive eruption of Wakaari, White Island, an active stratovolcano in the northeastern part of New Zealand's Bay of Plenty region. The island was a popular tourist destination known for its volcanic activity and had 47 people on the island at the time. The explosion killed 22 people. 2 were never found and were later pronounced dead. The other 25 people were injured, most of them needing intensive care due to severe burns. It was a nightmare. The injuries were horrific, and I was just sitting at work, I work in a newsroom, watching the footage come into the office and thinking about how I could have been there right now. If our car didn't need repairs or we had a better financial situation, we would have gone on that tour. 4 years ago, I was diagnosed with a very rare type of cancer. The specialist told me that he could not give me any guarantees that I would live for a year. A few months later, after a major operation to remove a large mass and many more tests, the doctors told me that they were actually wrong and I didn't have cancer at all. The specialist said that if he had made a list of 100 possible outcomes at the beginning of treatment, my final diagnosis would have been at number 100. He had never seen anything like it. The day I was told that, I felt like I dodged a fucking nuclear warhead.
What the fuck did they remove from you if it wasn't cancer?
That big mass turned out to be a second spleen. The surgeon said he had witnessed this before, but my second spleen was bigger than his fist, and he had never even remotely seen such a thing. At one time, I was diagnosed with a connective tissue disease, which was probably the reason I had a second spleen. The combination of the mass found on the scan and the symptoms I was suffering from led them to initially diagnose me with a neuroendocrine tumor. I was about 11 years old at the time. I was a very small child. Not tall, didn't weigh much. I was going to walk to the 7-Eleven, which was 15 minutes away. I wanted to use the change I had saved to buy my favorite drink. I didn't live in the most crime-ridden part of my city, but it was considered the second worst neighborhood. My father, who didn't live with us at the time, came to visit for some reason and offered to go to the shop for me. 30-odd minutes later, he staggers home. Turns out he had been attacked by 2 pit bulls on the way out. Passers-by didn't help him, but he still managed to get away. My dad was a tough guy. He still made it to the shop, bought me a soda, and came home. If I had been in his shoes, I would have probably been torn to shreds by those dogs, with my height of 140 centimeters and small weight. We reported the incident to animal control, and the city authorities ordered us to build a strong fence and put up a sign that reads, "Watch out for vicious dogs."
That's the end of it. You can watch our other videos. Thanks for watching and don't forget to subscribe. Bye-bye.